Today we continue on with our NHL season preview series. Today we're previewing the Stanley Cup champions from last season, the Florida Panthers. They had a lot of changes that came right after winning the Stanley Cup. Can they still compete for the Cup again? Where will they finish? We'll preview everything and give you our predictions coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, today we're looking at the season preview for the Stanley Cup champion Florida Panthers. They had quite a run these past couple of years, appearing in back-to-back Stanley Cup finals, ultimately becoming the 2024 Stanley Cup champs. In case you're new to this series, essentially we're going to quickly recap and look at some stats from last year to see where things finished off. Take a look at how the team has changed, so additions, subtractions, any rookies that we feel might be impactful this year. Take a look at any players that are potential contract extensions, so pending UFAs and RFAs that might get new deals done throughout the year. And then we'll take a look at the roster, how it projects, and any questions facing this franchise to see how their year is going to go. So essentially, let's start by recapping last year. Of course, they were first in their division, the Atlantic, won the Stanley Cup with a record of 52, 24, and 6, 110 points. So a remarkable year overall. They scored 268 goals, which was 11th best. They only allowed 200, which was second best. So that's a plus 68 differential, which is phenomenal. The power play and penalty kill were both in the top 10. The power play being 23.5% for 8th best. The PK was 82.5% for 6th best. So overall, lots to like. Looking at their top scorers last year, Sam Reinhart led the way, 94 points, absolutely career season, and a contract year, mind you. Blew away his totals. He scored 24 goals more than his previous career high, hitting 57 in total, 94 points, which is 12 points above his previous career high total in points. So that's going to be difficult to maintain or to beat for him moving forward. Matthew Tkachuk was second with 88 points. Barkov was third with 80 points. Carter Verhaeghe was 72. And then there's a big drop off after that down to Sam Bennett at 41. As far as their playoffs streaks go, they've been in the playoffs for the past 4 consecutive years, winning the Stanley Cup last year, appearing in the Stanley Cup final the past 2 years, and of course even prior to that, I think the first year of the 4 they had a division win there as well. So this team has been pretty strong for the past 4 seasons, the last 2 especially strong. Bill Zito, I think it's fair to say, has done a phenomenal job. Head coach Paul Maurice has been a good fit there the past 2 seasons since coming down as well. So this team is well equipped. They did have some losses this offseason. Like any successful team, the salary cap will come up and kind of, bite them, so to speak, so that they can't keep everybody. And they definitely lost some key players, but there's still lots left in this core to still think this is a really good team. The current cap situation, according to Puckpedia.com for the Florida Panthers, gives them $766,000 in space. It's not really enough to do a whole lot with, but in theory, they could figure out moving some players around and kind of generating a little bit more space, but they're pretty tight to the cap, like most teams. Not a huge surprise. Now let's take a look at how this team has changed throughout the year. Some new players coming into the Panthers organization this year. Nothing that's really going to blow you away, but they did bring in former goaltender Chris Driedger, who obviously had some years backing up Bobrovsky. Of course, he went to Seattle when the Kraken had their expansion draft. He signed as a free agent there. Unfortunately for Driedger, ended up having one season that wasn't overly great, went to the World Championships, got hurt, and has missed a lot of time and kind of struggled to find his spot since then. Obviously, Joey Daccord kind of moved up along and kind of took his spot there. So Driedger, as a UFA, comes back to Florida. Of course, now will compete with Spencer Knight for that backup spot to Bobrovsky. They also added a few other veteran defensemen, and Adam Boqvist and Nate Schmidt. And then in the forward group, they added Jesper Boqvist, Thomas Noshek, and AJ Greer. So again, nothing earth-shattering there. And based on what they lost, I do think it's fair to say this team has definitely been weakened a bit. On the back end, let's take a look at some subtractions. Who left this team? No longer there on the back end is Brandon Montour and Oliver Ekman-Larsson. So it's fair to say, no offense to the other guys, but Schmidt and Boqvist are major downgrades to Montour and OEL. OEL really found his game. I thought, not to say that he was, a superstar, but for what he was getting paid, because that's what's dogged Ekman Larsson a large part of his career, is the fact that he got that big contract with the Coyotes. He was the captain. He was just had way too high of an expectation. Since he left there, then he went to Vancouver, and then it didn't really get any better there. It's a tough market, but really I think he settled in Florida. He was getting less money and ended up kind of finding a better role. And he played very well and ended up taking over the top power play unit at times, especially with Montour really dealing with a lot of injuries. Last year I found Montour wasn't quite himself. So at times, OEL had to kind of take that top power play unit, especially in the playoffs. So the decor, definitely not as strong. Anthony Stolarz departs. He had some really good numbers as well. So fair to say that you could make an argument that maybe the goaltending's not as strong, but they also had Spencer Knight, kind of working on a lot of things off the ice and on the ice in the minors. So, he's still there. You bring in Dreger. I think goaltending will be okay. I don't really suspect a major change there with Bobrovsky playing the large chunk of the games. In the forward group, they lost Kevin Stenlund, Ryan Lomberg, Nick Cousins, Vladimir Tarasenko, Steven Lorentz, and Kyle Okposo. None of those guys were brought back. A few of those guys were deadline acquisitions like Tarasenko and Okposo. Otherwise, you're looking at basically fourth-line players, but they were good fourth-line players. Guys like Lomberg and Cousins and Stenlund played on the fourth line a lot, and certainly had a decent amount of contribution. So, in all honesty, you could say their decor is not as strong, and their bottom six definitely appears to be weakened here as well. As far as rookies to watch this year that I think could have an impact, there's not a lot in the organization that I think will do that, but maybe Mackie Samoskevich, I think will be one rookie to watch. He did get some time last year, and I would suspect that he might be a player to get maybe an increased look with the roster where it is this year. As far as guys that could be eligible for a contract extension, or guys that are eligible that we might see extensions in place. Not everybody, of course, will get one. Some of these guys that signed one-year deals will fall into that category as well. They are not eligible till January the 1st to do that. But on the UFA side, you got Aaron Ekblad, Nate Schmidt, Thomas Nosek, and then, of course, two big ones in Sam Bennett and Carter Verhaeghe. Now, whether those two guys are able to be retained will be tricky. I mean, looking at the cap being pretty tight as it is now, assuming we get another 5% increase next year, that's still, if you think about it, might be enough to pay Bennett or Verhaeghe, but not both. It's going to be challenging, nonetheless, even to keep one of them, because if you think about where the cap is at, unless a guy like Ekblad doesn't come back or signs for less money or what have you, but that's going to also be a scenario that's tough to unfold because Ekblad is now a lot more important than he used to be, given the fact that their decor has been weakened with Montour and OEL not in the mix there anymore. So going to be very, very interesting. They've got some big names that are in their last year, and I think they all have desired interest to stay. I think in a perfect world, the Panthers would like to keep them all, but it will be very tricky and challenging to do so. So we'll see. I don't suspect necessarily any trades this year. You never know. But oftentimes players that are pending UFAs are the most likely to be moved. But unless something goes wrong for the Panthers, I think at the very least they'd keep them as their own rentals and see if they can win again. I don't foresee them going in a new direction, unless you just had an absolutely unpredictable disaster of a season, which it's tough to see that kind of happening to them. On the RFA side, they do have a few players, including Boqvist, Bjornfoot, and actually both Boqvist, Jesper Boqvist and Adam, both are pending RFAs, as well as Toby Bjornfoot as well. So they could be extended sometime throughout the season, with Adam and Jesper Boqvist both signing one-year deals at the earliest would be January. So as I mentioned on the roster, let's take a look at how things are likely going to play out. Goaltending wise, it's going to be Bobrovsky as a starter with Spencer Knight and Chris Dreger battling for the number 2 and 3 spots. I would suspect, given Knight's contract, that he would be more likely to have that spot, but he's going to have to play his way into it. And if he doesn't have a good camp or doesn't look good, for some reason, if they're not pleased, I can see him maybe becoming a trade candidate because they could really use the space. They signed him to over a $4 million extension, and so far it hasn't worked out. But, at the same time, he was dealing with a lot of stuff off the ice that they wanted to be supportive of and help him get through and all that. So, I think the organization would really like to see him take some steps because in the next couple of years, ideally they'd like to see him kind of take over the net. And at this point, it's really difficult to say for sure if that's something they can bank on, right? But that's where the goaltending sits. On the decor, of course, like I said, Aaron Ekblad becomes that much more important with the departures we've seen. But Gustav Forsling has become the team's best defensive defenseman for sure, and certainly gained a lot of fanfare there. What a pickup that was on waivers. But you get Ekblad and Forsling, your top two guys. Then you got guys like Mikkola and Kulikov. Then you get your newly signed guys like Nate Schmidt, and Adam Boakvist. So, that blue line is, like I said, it's not as strong. I would suspect that Belinkus as well would likely be your 6-7 type of defenseman. We'll see how much playing time he can garner this year. But, Mikkola and Kulikov were certainly okay, but they previously would have played a smaller role. But now they're going to be forced kind of into your top four. I think they would be better fit for top four than Schmidt and Boakvist, but we'll see. Either way, they have a decent blue line, but it doesn't appear to be as good as it was before. In the forward group, your 12 forwards are likely going to be Barkov, Tkachuk, and Reinhart. For Hagee, Bennett, Lundell. I think Anton Lundell, after getting a big contract extension this year, is going to be expected to play more of a top six role. I mean, he was paid as such, so I suspect that he'll be given that opportunity. So I'm not sure exactly how they'll do their lines. Obviously, Barkov played a lot with Reinhart before. You get a lot of times you get Bennett and Tkachuk together. So I'm not sure really where Lundell fits, because really, in theory, he's your 3C, right? But you're paying him like a top six forward, so are they going to move him to the wing, or is somebody else going to move to the wing? I'm not sure how they're going to do that, but if you look at their top six forwards when it comes to talent and contracts, he does fit there. So we'll see. Outside of them, you got Evan Rodriguez, you get Luostarinen, the newly acquired AJ Greer, Thomas Nosek, Jesper Boakvist, Jonah Gatchevich is being in the mix there, as well as the youngster Samuel Skavich. So again, the bottom six appears to be weakened for sure. The top six and the core still has a lot of those talented pieces there in place. So this is still a really good hockey team. And one thing that Bill Zito and the Panthers have been remarkable at doing is finding good value, getting guys for cheap prices that have outplayed their contract. They've done it a number of times. So as far as the big questions facing the team is, can this blue line kind of exceed expectations, because they do appear to be a bit depleted and not as strong? Can Spencer Knight grab that that number 2 spot in between the pipes and challenge Bobrovsky for more playing time? His play this year will be huge as well. And can they figure out a way to keep Verhaeghe and Bennett? And if not, how do they pick? And could one of them be moved? I wouldn't think. I think the odds are one gets signed and one maybe leaves as a free agent, unless they make other cost-cutting moves. But it's just, if you look at the roster and you try to figure out what they could do, it's really difficult to say. I mean, they just signed Reinhart, they just signed Lundell. Tkachuk and Barkov are not going anywhere. So then, if you can't keep both guys, there's not a lot of other significance that you can move, right? And you get Ekblad, who's coming up on a new contract too. You really like Forsling, who's arguably your best defenseman. Bobrovsky's making $10 million and still signed for a couple of years. So that's why I kind of wonder if a guy like Spencer Knight, does he become expendable? I don't. In a perfect world, I don't think he does. But unless he can really take that step this year, do they want a chance, moving him and keeping both of Bennett and Verhaeghe? Between Knight's salary and what the cap will go up, maybe they'd have a better chance to keep both. But even then, I still think it'd be a challenge, especially if you factor, like I said, with Ekblad's contract being up, it will be hard to do. So I do wonder how they'll handle that this year. There's going to be a lot of questions, but I think more than anything, when you're trying to win now, sometimes you can just put those questions aside and deal with it at the end, and that's probably going to be the approach they take, but we'll see. Obviously, a big thing, too, is you got to wonder about Reinhart. Can he be a prime candidate here for regression? Like I said earlier, 57 goals in a career. He was on a contract here, and I'm not suggesting that, because a lot of players, though, you do get those explosions of stats in contract years, and it's really hard to duplicate. So, and realistically, if you factor in that the team's weakened a bit, and if some of these guys do regress even a little bit, it could take away those goals, and just it makes you wonder how the team is going to adjust. But all in all, I still see the Florida Panthers. They're definitely, I'm predicting that they'll be in the top 3 in the Atlantic again. I would suspect, and to be honest, I think between the Panthers and the Maple Leafs will be your top 2 teams. With Boston and Tampa, they're a little harder to predict right now. They've had some changes. They're getting a little bit older. I still think they're going to be really good teams too. But I think Florida and Toronto would be your most likely the 2 teams I can see winning the division. So I'm going to say they're going to be top 3 for sure, probably top 2, go to the playoffs again, and you just never know what can happen. Can they get all the way back to the Cup final for a 3rd straight year? That would be really, really tough to do. These guys have played a lot of hockey. They're a depleted team. I think that will be very, very challenging. So at this point, I think the odds are against them, but the odds have been against this team a lot in the past couple of years, and they've pushed through. So it's hard, really, really hard to bet against them. So let me know what you think and your expectations for the Panthers in the comments. We'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, of course, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all the news, rumors, and analysis of all 32 NHL teams. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you next time.